Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 6 of the most educational chess speedrun on YouTube. We're diving straight into the rapid game. My opponent goes d4, and I'm actually going to go knight to f6 and go for a King's Indian setup. If this is your first time watching this series, my name is Alex. I'm rated around 2000 Elo typically online, and I'm also just under 2000 over the board. And in this series, I play a rapid game each video and try to explain my thought process as in depth as I possibly can during the game to try and get across to you guys watching how a higher level player thinks when they're playing, and also hopefully provide some entertainment at the same time. And today we're going to be exploring the King's Indian. Now my opponent, I assume, is going to play this in a London fashion, like a Jabava London with knight c3 and bishop to f4. And I'm just going to develop normally. I'm not really concerned about the c7 pawn with moves like knight to b5 teaming up on it, because I'm just going to go d6. The reason I'm playing the King's Indian today is twofold. Firstly, I played the King's Indian up until about a year or so ago, and I had pretty decent success with it, both online and over the board, although I did end up struggling a little bit, which is why I ended up switching to the Slav defense. But I also had some comments in previous videos asking if I could show some other openings and explain them. And I was thinking, what openings do I actually know quite well? And I do know the King's Indian pretty damn well, I think. So we're going to go for that today. I might not get everything absolutely perfect, but I think it will be very interesting nonetheless. And we'll see how my opponent goes for this, because the London is a very annoying opening to play against. I think everybody knows that very, very instinctively. But the King's Indian defense is not particularly confrontational at the start. It is kind of a hyper modern type opening where we're not committing any pawns to the center just yet. We are probably going to play d6 at some point and maybe aim for c5 or e5 to break against this d4 pawn and try and unleash the powerful dart squared bishop that black has. But we're not doing it yet. Firstly, we're going to develop. We may end up fianchettoing our light squared bishop. My opponent goes h3. I'm just going to castle. I mean, this is the setup that you want with the King's Indian, right? This is kind of the trademark King's Indian setup. Opponent goes knight to f3. We're going to go d6. This is all very bog standard. And we're going to have to figure out what we're doing with this light squared bishop as well. A lot of the time in mainline King's Indian games, where white plays like a d4, c4, e4 kind of setup, like very traditional King's Indian, this light squared bishop often stays on c8 and prepares to sacrifice itself for a kingside attack. But I assume my opponent's actually going to castle queenside, so that's not going to happen. My opponent plays queen d2, and yes, this steps out of the way to allow him to castle queenside, but also note that it prepares the move bishop to h6 because the queen teams up with the bishop, trying to trade off my bishop on g7, which is a very important piece for defending my king. Now, if I do something like a6 to prepare b5, which I may do soon, or something like knight b to d7 to develop my knight, then my opponent's going to hit me with bishop to h6, and I'm going to have no choice but to trade my bishop, either by taking and allowing the queen in, or letting him take me and taking with my king. So what I'm going to do instead is go rook to e8. This is a really common theme that goes across many different openings where fianchettoed bishops are involved. And what we're going to do is after bishop to h6, if my opponent plays it, which he does, we're going to drop back to h8 because the rook is no longer on f8, so my opponent can't take the rook. And our rook is useful because it supports an e5 push at some point, which we can do whenever we like, if we want to. c5 again is a very, very common theme in the King's Indian. So worth noting, although I think I like the move c6 to prepare b5 and b4 to go after this knight. But my opponent is playing this well because he's not committing his bishop or his king just yet. I still don't know whether he's going to castle queenside or kingside, so I don't want to overcommit too much on the queenside just yet. So I think it makes sense to start with knight b to d7. Now, my only concern is what if e5 is played, which is something you always have to watch out for. Now, typically, that's not really an issue because let's say I go, I don't know, a6, and my opponent goes e5. I can always take, and I'll have a retreating square for my knight on d7. But if I put this knight on d7, this knight gets a little bit stranded and could get trapped after things like knight to h5 and g4. It might have to go back to g7, and I mean it's okay, but it's misplaced massively. e5 again is a perfectly valid move because after things like takes, if queen takes, rook takes, you might think the e5 pawn is hanging, but after knight takes e4, opening up the bishop's attack on e5, we are absolutely fine. And as you could probably also just argue that rook back to e8 wins a pawn anyway. I am tempted, however, to fianchetto my light squared bishop, but maybe we can do that by going a6, b5, and then bishop to b7. Maybe that's a more active way of doing it, so that we potentially threaten a move like b4 in the future, and maybe induce a move like a3 from my opponent. So it all very complicated. These King's Indian positions do tend to get complicated, and it can be difficult to know exactly how to go about it with the black pieces, because we are at a space disadvantage at the end of the day. White has very strong central pawns, and a move like e5, I mean, it's okay, but my opponent can always go d5 and lock my dark squared bishop out of the game, and we'd probably have to play a move like f5 in the future to try and undermine white's center, which again is fine. But I think I like this idea of a6, b5 fianchettoing the bishop. I don't know. I don't know. Let me think about e5 for a second. If d5... I think we could go for a move like knight f to d7 and f5, but because my opponent hasn't castled yet, I don't want to overcommit. So I'm going to go a6. If my opponent does something like, let's say, bishop d3, b5 castles kingside, then I'm going to be more likely to play the move e5, try and lock the center, and then drop my knight back to try and play f5, because then I know my opponent has committed his king to the kingside. But no, he goes e5. And this is something that I did mention, but I wasn't particularly scared of, because like I said, by not putting this knight there, I can put this knight there. Now, it is worth noting that if knight f to d7, my opponent could go pawn to e6 and try and break up my kingside structure, but I don't think that's too concerning. If a move like knight to g5 targeting the pawn, I think I can just put the knight back on f6, and my bishop defends, and I should be fine. A move like bishop c4 can always be met with d5 blocking it off. So we could play knight f to d7. We could also take first. We could take on e5. If knight takes, then, I mean, there's nothing to be concerned about. The knight isn't doing anything special. A move like bishop to e6 even looks nice. Just targeting a2 if my opponent goes queenside and controlling the d5 square. If takes and pawn takes, I could trade queens. Let's say bishop takes, knight back. I think I like knight back immediately. Sorry, my contact lens is really annoying me right now. I think knight back right now makes a lot of sense. If my opponent takes on d6, I can take with the e-pawn or the c-pawn. I mean, taking with the e-pawn gives discovered check, and I would expect bishop to e2. And I mean, probably knight to c6 would be my follow-up move, just putting pressure on the d4 pawn, and black looks comfortable. I could also take with the c-pawn, and I don't know, maybe go b5, bishop to b7. That way I maintain more pawns in the center, but I think I prefer taking with the e-pawn. Not because of discovered check, particularly, but because I just like having the rook open. Okay, that's an interesting move from my opponent. So I can't take on e5 because after d takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, my queen will hang, which makes the move knight to c6 very tempting because I defend my queen and I also put more pressure on the central pawns. and a move like d5 I can always take on e5, so I'm going to play that. Knight to c6. And this is kind of the point of hypermodern openings. My opponent extends pawns into the center, but this e5 move a couple of moves ago could be an overextension of his position. Okay, bishop to... What? Can I just go b5? Bishop b3, then take? I mean, f7 does look tender, especially considering the fact that this dark squared bishop is cutting my king off, and I do have to be careful of sacrifices. But let's say b5, takes, knight g5, check. Oh, the idea is king g8 and knight e6 trapping my queen. That's a common theme in the King's Indian, and it's scary. You've really got to watch out for it. That's a very nice idea from my opponent. So I think e6 probably makes the most sense. Yeah, let's just go e6 and stop the bishop from taking on f7. This is kind of uncomfortable. My opponent's playing this quite well. I think we're still fine, but it's just a difficult position, really. d5 is definitely a move I would consider here. Knight g5 now I don't think is that effective. I really don't think that's effective at all, actually. Because e6 is very well defended. I think I can get away with taking, and if takes, knight takes, we attack the bishop, we offer a queen trade, and my queen is well defended. Could start with b5, but I think we can play that at any time. I think taking and we're good, right? I don't think black has any threats. Sorry, white has any threats. I don't think. Okay, if takes, then we just take and we're fine, right? We're absolutely fine there. And also, once this knight moves, my bishop defends e6. So I think we can get away with just taking. I don't think I'm blundering anything here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm fine. Again, yeah, this is kind of the point of a hypermodern opening, just to try and get your opponent to overextend. Obviously, that's not the only point of a hypermodern opening, but it's a part of it. Let's take with the knight. Everything looks very well defended here. Our queen is well defended. The bishop's under attack. We're offering a queen trade. My bishop is going to become very, very active in a minute. Do I take with the rook or the knight, actually? I'm tempted to take with the knight, you know. So, I mean, rook takes, knight takes, rook d1, attacking the knight. Maybe I can go bishop d7, but that does look flimsy after f4, trying to dislodge my knight's defense from the bishop. So maybe taking with the knight, and then going b5, bishop b7 ideas, perhaps. I may be up a pawn, but the position is definitely not winning yet. I've got a lot of work to do here, because white's pieces are very active, and my position is a little bit cramped. But if I take with a knight, my opponent could try and double up, but he has to save his bishop first. So let's say knight takes bishop b3. What's my follow-up? Because the knight isn't great there. Knight back to c6. Oh, come on, game. It's getting a bit laggy here. Okay, knight back to c6. And then if he tries to double up rooks with, like... My opponent just offered a draw. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Let me just refresh my page and fix this real quick. Sorry, I just had to do a few bits there to fix the game. I can't believe he just offered me a draw. No, I'm not accepting that. I think knight takes. I'm going to do it. So we're up a pawn. We're down a bit on the clock, but we still have 7 whole minutes, and we have 10 seconds of increment every move. So that's probably fine. His bishop, although it's active there, it isn't really doing anything, and the knight is blocking it from coming back. These pieces look very active, but they're not really doing anything. Now the queens are off the board. I don't really have the same problems with defending myself, so that's very promising. Yeah, let's just put the knight back on c6. Let's play a little bit quickly, even if these aren't necessarily the best moves, because I like the idea of knight to a5 going after this bishop. I think I like that. And then like b6, bishop b7, getting on a useful diagonal. Okay, knight jumps to the center. I mean, maybe it wants to come to c5. F6 is defended, so that's fine. I'm tempted to go b6 to prepare bishop b7 and also to stop the knight from coming in. If b6, f4, where am I putting this knight? b6, f4. I have to put the knight back on d7, which is not that nice. Not that nice. So actually, I think knight to a4 makes more sense. Sorry, knight to a5. Because then this knight has the c6 square if f4 gets played. I think that makes a lot of sense. By the way, if you are still watching this far into the video, firstly, thank you very much. I hope you're finding this useful and interesting. And secondly, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it, and it genuinely really motivates me to keep making videos. I was actually messing around with I've got like an actual microphone literally just over the other side of the room, and I tried to set it up today, and I did use it like 6 months ago or something, and I spent like a good bit of money on it, but for some reason this headset still sounds better. I've messed around with so many of the settings, but I still don't understand why it's worse than a headset microphone. It's ridiculous. But anyway, this position, back to the game, back to the game. Yeah, okay, f4. I think we just drop our knight back to c6, although we can take on b3 first with check. But I actually don't want to do that. I don't want to do that, because I want to try and get my opponent to play bishop to a4, or at least give him the option of playing bishop to a4, so that I can play b5 with tempo, kicking the bishop back and then taking, so that it's easy to develop this bishop. I do have to be careful of this rook infiltrating to d7, though. That's worth noting. Okay, I assume my opponent's trying to play knight to f6 check and force me to take with the bishop, which is definitely uncomfortable, but I don't think there's anything I can do about it. Yeah, I don't think I have a choice there, so let's not ruminate on that. It's going to happen, it'll be uncomfortable, but we'll find a way out of it. We'll find a way out of it. Let's take knight b3 check. And yeah, it is a bit of an uncomfortable position, to be fair. My opponent is navigating this pretty well. This bishop still kind of sucks. Maybe e5 makes a lot of sense. Trying to get this bishop out. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we should do it. We do give away the d5 square, though. That's not great. I don't love that. Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky. The King's Indian really is tricky, because White has so much space. And I mean, I've definitely misplayed parts of this game. I'm not just blaming the opening solely. But I do struggle with it sometimes, which is why I stopped playing it. What about b6? b6 stops this knight from getting in, although the knight's going to go there anyway. But this knight could always swing around to replace it. So b6, bishop b7. My issue was rook to d7, but I think we just go rook c8, defending c7, and then we have ideas of knight b8 to kick the rook out, maybe? Although this bishop on f6 is going to be so annoying. f5 is worth considering, because if knight to f6 takes, we have king f7, so the king can boot the bishop away. Let's say bishop back to g5, and then it's a little bit easier to defend myself, I think. I think I like that idea. I know e6 is very weak in that line, but we could play e5 at a future point. Let's go f5. Let's go f5. I don't like the idea of the bishop getting to f6 and completely destroying my king's movement. So let's do it like this. And we are still stopping this knight's movement pretty well, which is good. The only issue is my light square bishop sucks. It absolutely sucks. Again, e5 is a very liberating move, but then we let the knight in, and c7 is very weak. So I don't love it. Don't love it. Okay, what else can we do? What else can we do? Well, it's difficult to move, to be fair. It's difficult to do anything. We might have to go for this fianchetto plan, which isn't terrible, but this does come with check, which is a little bit of an issue. Little bit of an issue. How do we deal with this position? You know, a really ugly idea, but it might work, is knight b8, followed by bishop d7, because the knight defends this square. Right, knight b8, bishop d7, and bishop c6. So that the bishop controls this diagonal, but it also controls d7. And then my knight can come to d7 and then like c5 or f6. That's so ugly, but it might work. It might work. Does my opponent have threats? If knight b8, knight a4, trying to go to c5. Well, I think that's fine. Knight b8, knight a4, bishop d7, knight c5, bishop c6. That's okay. I'm gonna do it. I don't know if this is the right idea. I literally have no clue. But I don't see a better way out of this because our pieces are so awkward. We're up a pawn, right? So all we really have to do is hold on to that pawn. There was some kind of chess. Okay, no, I think this is a mistake. I think that's a mistake because that surely just helps us, right? In fact, we don't even have to take the rook. We could play bishop d7 here. I mean, we could take, and c7 is under attack and go something like c6, but then, you know, rook d1, and how is our bishop getting out? But if we go bishop d7, white has no threats. If takes, cool. Or we could even take with the bishop. And I think we're okay there. I think we're okay. Like, knight c6 obviously attacks the rook, but white could just repeat. Or go to, like, d2 to prepare doubling up, so that doesn't help us. Let's go bishop d7. I think this works. I really hope this works. Yeah, rook d8 I don't think achieves what white wants to achieve. Take. c7's under attack. Bishop c6. Bishop c6. Take, rook d8. Well, then the rook can get to a square like h8, which is not great. That's not brilliant. If takes, take c5. I think we have to take, so let's do that first. Because we are low on time. I really don't want to give the pawn away. I really don't. c6, I also don't really want to play, because then this bishop sucks. It absolutely sucks. I'd love to go knight c6 and trade the bishop for the bishop, but this comes with check. If this, then he just takes on c7, and we lose our pawn up. Advantage. c5, well, this we could take, and then do something like that. I think c5 might be the move. As uncomfortable as our position looks, c5 bishop, c7, trying to target the knight and remove the defender of the bishop. I think we just go king to e7, defending the bishop. Although that walks into bishop d6 check, so maybe king e8. Tough position, but I think c5. I think so. My opponent is playing this really well for a 1200 rated player. Like, fair play. He's doing a really good job here, making our life difficult. I think we've got a winning position, but we only have a minute on the clock, so I may have to shut up a little bit and really focus. Yeah, I think we can get away with this. Yeah, here, targeting g2. Take. h3 is under attack. h4, knight c6, or actually knight d7, attacking the bishop. Or knight c6, preparing rook d8. I don't know. Don't know. Oh, if here, then he wants this. Okay, that makes sense. Here, check, here. That's very uncomfortable, but rook h8. Ah, no, that can't be good. That can't be good. Ah, this is rough. What if we just develop, take rook c8, and try and play the endgame? I think we have to go for that. I think we have to go for that. So our opponent wins the pawn back, which is not ideal because now I think we just have a worse position. We're going to try and do our best with it. Okay, I want to go bishop c6. I guess an advantage is that our pawn majority is probably better than his pawn majority because we can create a passed pawn more easily. That move looks like a waste of time, so that's good. Let's do this. Offer a trade. Because like I say, we can create a passed pawn quite easily. Now, we probably don't want to get to an opposite coloured bishop endgame, because I think we can squeeze a win out of this. Our bishop dominates this knight very well for the time being, so that's good. The knight could try and swing round via e2 to d4. Okay, he doesn't. I'm going to go bishop d5. Oh, okay, that's a free pawn. Thank you. Don't know what our opponent's doing. Now we're supporting e5. There we go. Okay, king moves up. Let's move our king up. No rush. The king can't get into the position, so that's absolutely fine. The bishop can't protect e5 via either of the squares. Okay, knight retreats. Might be trying to come in like this. I think this is a good time to play e5. Now we're making progress. Now we're making progress. We can win this position now. Absolutely grinding endgame. Honestly, such a difficult endgame. If knight here, yeah, as expected, I think bishop d5 makes the most sense. Trying to control this knight as much as possible. And our opponent blunders. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we give this check. We win the bishop. Oh my. What a performance from my opponent here. Really, really well done from him. Like, he crumbled a little bit at the end, but he did such a good job. I would give him a rematch, but for the sake of the video, I don't really want to make it like 2 hours long. They're already long enough as it is. I'm just going to give him a well played. That was a very interesting game. Let's get into the analysis. I would encourage you to stick around for it if you don't typically stick around for the analysis, because it's going to be a dead interesting one, especially with this game. So let's hop into it. Okay, so let's have a look at the opening. We have d4 knight f6, knight c3 g6. This isn't the best line for black by any means, but it's a King's Indian. The computer is always going to think it's not great. h3, not the best move. e4 is typically the way to go, but I don't think it's worth thinking too hard about the evaluation just yet, because we're not out of the opening. Like, the computer still wants moves like d5 from me, which, as a King's Indian, like, if we're playing a King's Indian, that's not how you play a King's Indian. This pawn goes to d6. d5 is a perfectly good move, but it's not a King's Indian anymore. So castle, knight f3, d6, queen d2, and the computer wanted b5 immediately, actually. If knight b5, then knight to e4. No, sorry. That's d5. e4 attacking the queen. Queen d3, bishop f5. Okay, sure. Not a normal move at all. I go rook to e8, which the computer thinks is an inaccuracy, but you can see the logic behind it, right? We preserved the bishop. e4, e5 was actually the best move. Now, after d takes, I was talking about in the game, if this happens, knight takes e5 doesn't win a pawn, because if knight takes e4, and the knight's under attack, I've won my pawn back, knight e4, bishop e5, and material is equal. I'd say it's probably just a completely equal game, to be honest, like practically. And if e5 and d5 locking the center, then black kind of plays around white's central wedge here, potentially aims for a move like f5 in the future to break it apart. Let's say, this isn't the best line for white at all, but let's say bishop to d3, I don't know, c6 or knight b6, castles. I don't even know how exactly you'd go about this position because f5 is actually quite difficult to play. Because it's not obvious where to put this knight or this rook. So c6 is probably the break that you have to go for. Because if something like takes and takes, then black gets d5 in the future, and it's relatively comfortable. But it's kind of crazy. Now, a6 is the move I played, which my opponent actually punished perfectly. I thought this was an overextension. Now, I didn't want to go for this line with queen d2, bishop d2, and knight after d7, because I was worried about e6 first of all, which is slightly better for white, but better even still is knight to d5, targeting c7, and there's actually no way for black to defend that c7 pawn. So I instead chose knight f to d7, but the computer still thinks that e6 is winning. And if takes... Okay, you're not actually going to believe the move that the computer wants. It's h4. Like, what? It wants h4. And apparently the game is basically over. e5, h5, ed4, hg6, bishop f6, take king h8, knight e4 attacking the bishop, knight e5, knight e4, what is going on? Bishop e5, queen g5, and the game is just over, apparently. I mean, you can see why, but this is a very difficult idea to find, to be fair. My opponent chooses to castle instead, and I go knight to c6. Again, the computer wants e6, but my opponent chooses bishop c4, which I felt like was a mistake. Now, knight b6 is apparently the way to play this, because I suppose if my opponent goes for this line, it doesn't quite work, because knight to e6, trapping the queen, doesn't exist, because I defend the e6 square. What I was concerned about was after b5, bishop f7, king f7, knight g5, king g8, knight e6, my queen is trapped. Really, really nice idea from my opponent. But I go e6, just blocking off the diagonal, and knight g5 is a mistake. It doesn't do anything. I was concerned about bishop g5 because I can't put anything on f6 to block, so I'd probably have to go knight to e7 to block the attack on my queen. And then h4, h5 is deadly, but even if my opponent doesn't play that, just something like 4, adding another attacker to the position, and my position becomes very difficult to play. I would probably have to go for this kind of break To be honest, that would be probably my idea, and maybe attacking like this, because the game would get very, very wild, and I'm definitely losing, but I have to try something. My opponent goes knight g5 though, which doesn't threaten anything, so de5, de5, and knight d5. The computer thinks the game is equal. Queen d8, knight d8 is actually better by the looks of it. Well, they're both playable to be fair. And black has a slight advantage, but this is very difficult to play. Oh, the best move is bishop g7. I didn't even consider that. Of course it's bishop g7, because he has to trade. We get off one of white's best pieces, and the position becomes a lot easier. That makes sense. Knight dc6 is okay. Knight g to e4 is a mistake. Knight a5 is also a bit of a mistake. I should have gone f5 immediately, so that this bishop g5, knight f6 idea doesn't exist in the first place. This knight retreats, and then I have knight f7 apparently, but also knight a5 going after this bishop because it's a powerful bishop, right? I had the right idea, but the wrong move order because I didn't really consider the power of bishop g5. Now, the computer actually wanted me to take like this and then play knight d7, controlling the f6 square. Again, I didn't realize the power of bishop g5 going after this square. So I played this wrong, and my opponent goes bishop g5. But I did find the best move after knight b3, cb3, and f5. That is the best way for black to play this position. And I've got a bit of a chance. I'm still a bit better, but it's very difficult to find the best moves. Try and find the best move in this position. Like, pause the video for as long as you like. I don't know if you're going to find it. I don't think I would have found it. It's king g7. I assume the point is h6, but like, you're just going to ignore all of this and take your eyes off of e6 and go king g7? Like, it seems so counterintuitive. Like, what's the idea? h6, bishop h4. And then guess what the best move is? Guess what the best move is? King to f7. The whole point is just to go h6 and then do nothing. Just go back. Like, what? I don't know, bro. I don't know. I go knight b8, which the computer says is an inaccuracy, but rook d8 is a mistake, and bishop d7 is equal with rook takes d8 for the best move. Rook d1, rook d8, bishop d8, the only way forward. The issue is, what else does black do? If you do bishop c6, which was my initial idea, then white just does this, and you can't move the knight. Now you can, I suppose, try and go for a move like b6 and knight d7 so that the rook is defended, but I was concerned about ideas like rook to h8 as well, although here you can just go king g7, I suppose, or bishop takes g2 as the computer wants. But by taking, you relieve the pressure a little bit. c5 is an inaccuracy though, bishop c6 is better. Now, why didn't I go for this? I think it was bishop c7, and if this, then rook d8 is losing. But I can actually go knight d7, apparently. And after g3, rook c8, let's say bishop d6, and then knight f6, computer thinks that black is better. Again, I think it's probably because of this 4 versus 3. This is a 3 versus 2, but because of the double pawns for white, it's basically impossible to force a passed pawn through. Whereas with this, I just have to go e5 like we did in the game later on, and it's a lot easier to create a passed pawn, because the structure is better. c5 doesn't work though. c6 was my other idea, but like this really doesn't work, and the computer thinks the game is completely lost, because of knight to a4, because the bishop no longer can take the knight. We go c5, bishop c7, king e8 is a blunder. Oh, because now knight a4 can be played, and knight b6 is deadly. But now we can't take because of rook d8, king f7, ba4, and the knight can't move, and it's about to get lost. Whereas in this position, if knight a4 was played, we can just take knight c6, kick the bishop away to like b6, and then we can move the rook. probably play a move like king e8 to stop this rook infiltrating first, though, and if bishop c5, rook probably to d8. And the position is technically drawn, but I think black actually has the better winning chances because all the pawns are on light squares, meaning this bishop can't target any of them. And again, this is a better pawn majority than this pawn majority for white. But fortunately, my opponent didn't see that. He goes bishop b6, we go knight c6, takes, knight e7. I'm trying to get my bishop to c6. a3, I don't really understand what it does. To be totally honest, I really don't get it. But we go bishop to c6, targeting g2. g3 stops that. And rook d8. I thought it made more sense to try and trade the rooks off. The computer prefers rook to c8. But I was like, well, this bishop just moves. And then why is my rook on c8? So I wanted to trade the rooks off. Takes, takes. And the position is completely equal. But my opponent blunders a pawn. b4 is obviously the move to play here to keep hold of the pawn. I mean, you could move the king, but why tie the king down to defending a pawn? You want the king to be active. So b4, I'm not really sure why that wasn't played, but my idea, I think, was knight to c6, preparing the move e5. And again, we try and get the pawns through. Let's say king e3, e5. Oh, sorry, that hangs a bishop. That hangs a bishop. So let's say something like bishop c4, king goes back, and then e5. Again, the position is completely equal, but we can try and make something of this because we have the 3 on 2. And to be honest, I think practically black is a minorly, a small bit better, But knight d1 is played, we get an extra pawn, but the game is not over by a long shot. There's still a lot to do, and you have to be very careful because let's say something like knight d5, after takes takes, the game is over. Opposite colored bishops, there's nothing to be done. Now, I'm okay if white decides to do this because it's bishop versus knight, which is I can still win that, but opposite colored bishops I can't. So you got to be careful. Knight c6, king e3. We bring the king up, knight back to e2. I mean, I assume you're trying to come to to d4, and I really can't take if that happens because let's say I play h5, knight d4, takes, the game is over. Or if like this, takes, the game is over. I mean, taking with the king is probably better, but opposite colored bishops, nothing to be done. It's just a draw. So e5 has to be played to stop knight d4. And after takes, there is something in the position now. Because after knight d4, which is what my opponent plays, white can't force a trade of pieces. So knight c4 check is apparently the best move here. And if king d3, we take on b2 with check. And if king c3, we have this check, winning the bishop, and we're up 2 pawns. A difficult line to calculate with no time, though, which is why I choose bishop to d5. Because I'm just trying to monitor this knight's movement alongside my pawns controlling it. And then king f4 just blunders the game, and my opponent resigns. But let's say my opponent does something like, I don't know, b4. Okay, that blunders a pawn, so maybe not b4. It is difficult to play, to be fair, because again, this is a scary pawn majority to have to defend against. I don't even know what white can really do here, to be totally honest. Let's say, I don't know, bishop b4. Again, you lose this pawn. So b3, the computer wants to stop this. This pawn is loose, but defended for now. I don't know, bishop g2, h3, h6, trying to break through eventually. Like, the moves the computer comes up with, like bishop f8, I suppose makes sense, to be fair. Although, you can't do that because you're going to lose the bishop. Although the computer thinks that it's fine after king g5. Because you get this pawn, and I suppose you get that pawn. But even then, I think that there's a very good chance that black is winning, because something like this gives the game away, no? After knight e3. g4. And the best... Try and find the best move here. It's bishop c2. and after h5, king f8, h6. Now you take and go king g8 and try and freeze white's position, put him in a bit of a zugzwang. b4, b5, and white has to do either put the pawn forward, let your king here. This pawn can't move, of course, so you're going to have to give one of them up on the next move. Or you retreat the king and let my king in. And if something like this, I assume just bishop drops back and white is going to lose his pawns. But some really interesting lines there. A very, very difficult sort of endgame to have to navigate from kind of this position. Well, no, the issue was that I let the knight in. I should have tried to stop that by bringing the knight back to d7, but I didn't realize. But yeah, a tough game. We do manage to win with the King's Indian, though. I hope this showcases a bit more of how to play when you're on the back foot and trying to win from otherwise losing or very difficult positions. If you guys did enjoy this video, then check out the video here because YouTube thinks you're really going to like it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.